Chapter 33. As per the keep what you kill rule of the backrooms, Jacob and Temperance took the liberty of looting Kevin, while I picked through the eviscerated Kathy's spatial core. The haul was better than I could have hoped for, and after wading through the same type of low-level relics for weeks on end, it felt good to finally get something new. Kathy had 3 relics, a single rare grade and a pair of uncommons, as well as 1 rare relic shard. So far, the shards had mostly served as currency, but in theory they could be used to craft actual, bona fide relics. I hadn't had much luck with it, and everything I'd attempted to make resulted in trash-tier garbage, which was usually more of a curse than a blessing. If I could start crafting my own uncommon or rare grade relics, however, I'd need to take another stab at it. Not now, obviously, but once I had a little downtime and wasn't in a hostile deathscape filled to the brim with murderous dwellers who might try to feed me into a whirling lawnmower blade. The rare grade, fittingly called Eldritch Hair Tonic, was a bit of a mixed bag. It took the form of a bottle of cheap MLM shampoo that promised superhuman hair roots with the strength of 10 full-grown chimpanzees right on the label. Apparently, it was the relic responsible for the batshit crazy leg tentacles that had been growing out of Kathy's skull. When equipped, the user would sprout powerful tentacles capable of acting as extra limbs. The more levels the relic had, the more tentacles you grew and the more autonomous they became. On paper, it wasn't half bad, assuming you didn't mind looking like a nightmare version of Doc Ock. Problem was, if you equipped the relic for long enough, eventually the changes became permanent, and it was impossible to remove the relic from your spatial core. I'd picked up something similar on the first floor called Mask of the Faceless. It increased sound and smell sensitivity by 10% each day, while simultaneously decreasing eyesight by 10% each day. Eventually you ended up without a face. No eyes. No mouth. Just pasty skin stretched tight over empty sockets. Seriously fucked up. I also had a sneaking suspicion that it slowly transformed delvers into dwellers, but that was pure speculation at this point. Needless to say, the hair tonic was a hard pass for lots of reasons, though it had potential assuming I could find the right relic to forge it with. The real prize, however, was one of the uncommons, which looked like a ball of orange cat hair mixed with a generous heaping of old phlegm. I'd been around the block long enough to know a giant hairball when I saw one. Feral Hairball. Uncommon relic, level 1. Range, single target. Cost, 35 mana. Cooldown, 2 minutes. What is the opposite of PSPSPS? No idea, but you're definitely gonna want to figure that out before you cast this. What begins as an innocent enough cough quickly escalates into a hacking wheeze that echoes across the battlefield, as you summon a grotesque mass of writhing flesh, matted with orange fur and studded with a disturbing array of twisted cat limbs. This sentient hairball latches onto enemies with its razor-sharp claws and teeth, delivering a barrage of frenzied attacks that leave deep, festering wounds behind. Each attack has a 25% chance to inflict cat scratch fever, a truly nasty debuff that deals 1 damage seconds for 30 seconds and further reduces the target's health regeneration by 25% for 2 minutes. The cooldown period was on the longer side, but the ability dealt decent damage, plus it also had a certain disturbing psychological je ne sais quoi that was hard to quantify. It immediately reminded me of Temperance's ball of spiders and also brought to mind the uncommon ball of flies relic Jacob had received from the Shardstain Golem. As far as I knew, Jacob hadn't done anything with that particular relic, and I idly wondered if he might be willing to let me experiment on it. I was certain the 3 relics would synergize well, and thanks to the researcher's codex, I could quickly and easily run an analysis to see what the final product was likely to be. Temperance was due for a few upgrades anyway, and that seemed like a good option. The last relic I pulled from Kathy's corpse was an uncommon which resembled a basic smartphone, with only a single app labeled Spurlfeed. It was by far the strangest relic I'd ever seen. It didn't enable a mana usage, nor was it a purely physical relic that utilized stamina. As far as I could tell, it didn't actually do anything. Not by itself. As the title suggested, it seemed to be an amplifier for some other, more powerful relic. Spurfeed Amplifier. Uncommon relic, Level 1. Range, Linked Neural Network. Welcome to the future of perception management, because reality is a dystopian nightmare, and the real world sucks donkey dick. Embrace the power of the P33 social filter, which seamlessly smooths out the rough edges of reality, applying a virtual airbrush to everything around you. Ugly truths. Gone. Past traumas. Numbed. The inherent messiness of human experience. Eradicated. Stretch marks, unpleasant blemishes, even unsightly face tentacles, all erased right before your very eyes. What more could you possibly ask for? While the P33 amplifier itself doesn't create new illusions, it does boost the power of all existing P33 illusions within a 50-foot radius, making those illusions brighter, more dangerously convincing, and easier to lose yourself in. Those under the amplifier's influence for extended periods may begin to experience lingering effects, such as an inability to distinguish between what's real and what's not, even after leaving the amplifier's range. The more linked amplifiers in a given area, the more powerful this relic becomes. The P33 social filter, showing life the way it should be. It came as no surprise when Jacob reported that Kevin also had a P33 amplifier tucked away inside his spatial core. The existence of the strange relic explained some of what was happening around here. Jacob had been right. There was a mass illusion in play, and although the dwellers weren't the source of that power, they served as mobile Wi-Fi routers that boosted the signal. Assuming every single dweller on this floor had one of these amplifiers, then it wasn't hard to understand why the illusion was so powerful and pervasive. I still wasn't entirely sure why the Burger Baron's crown wasn't doing more to protect me, though. It was a fabled great artifact, for shit's sake. Maybe the illusionary magic of this place just really was that strong? Although I couldn't discount that possibility, I felt like there was still more to this story than I fully understood. Aside from the P33 amplification relic, Kevin had also had two other relics, one rare, the other uncommon. Unsurprisingly, Lawnmower Went Blade launched a razor-sharp blade of hardened air. But just like with Kathy's Eldritch Hair Tonic, the downside was that equipping it radically altered your physical appearance. In this case, by replacing your chest cavity with the underside of a lawnmower. I wasn't sure how that was anatomically possible. I was pretty sure you still needed things like organs to live, and I had no intention of finding out, especially since the change would become permanent after just a few hours. The second relic, Whiskey Fists, was an uncommon stamina-based ability that allowed the user to fly into an uncontrollable drunken rage, drastically increasing athleticism, toughness, and health regen, while tanking perception, resonance, and grit. Using it also left you with a monstrous hangover, which could linger for an hour or more. Under the flavor text, it read, "You know how I get when I drink. Still, I wouldn't have to use the belt if you just behaved better." The words hit uncomfortably close to home. My dad had never hit me or my brother, but I'd grown up in small-town Ohio, where more than a few of my friends showed up to school with black eyes or broken arms. Ran into a doorknob or fell down the stairs were the usual excuses, though everyone, including the teachers and the town sheriff, knew the truth. They just didn't give a shit. It was one of those dark, unspoken realities of suburban life that no one liked to acknowledge. None of the relics fit with my current build, and a small part of me hesitated to even sell the damned things. There were more than a few delvers who'd be stupid, or desperate, enough to use something like the Went Blade or the Hair Tonic and wind up as a monster for their trouble. At the same time, I also wasn't anyone's babysitter. I wanted to help other delvers, but it sure as shit wasn't my job to decide what was best for them. I didn't know what the right thing to do was, but I also didn't need to decide right now. I still had some time to noodle on things, and there was always a good chance that I'd die horrifically before it ever became an issue at all. I did, however, bring up my idea about attempting to forge Temperance's spider ball into something newer and better. She was extremely hesitant at first. The lady took an almost perverse pleasure in hitting things in the face with a ball of spiders, but once I explained how much more lethal the spell could be, she perked right up. Jacob still had the uncommon ball of flies relic sitting in his storage space and was more than happy to donate it to the cause. We were a team, after all, and what was good for one of us was good for all of us. Besides, it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the three would form an unholy abomination of mass destruction, a suspicion the Codex compatibility analysis quickly confirmed. Writhing ball of dire mosquitoes. Rare relic, level 1. Range, single target. Cost, 35 mana. Cooldown, 30 seconds. Statistically, mosquitoes kill more people than any other creature of Earth. Dire mosquitoes make regular mosquitoes look like little bitches. Just imagine a mosquito the size of a Japanese murder hornet with 8 legs, quarter-inch fangs, and the disposition of a rabid alley cat. Now imagine 100 of them attacking all at once. Crawling beneath your clothes. Burrowing their way beneath your skin. Laying their young inside your flesh while they eat you alive. Yeah, that's a fucking dire mosquito. They are basically nature's way of telling you to go fuck yourself. Ball of dire mosquitoes inflicts 90 points of bleeding damage over 30 seconds, with a 5% chance to trigger infestation with each cast. When an infestation occurs, juvenile dire mosquitoes burst from the afflicted victim's skin, dealing an additional 25 points of hemophilia damage and starting the cycle anew at no additional mana cost. Dire mosquitoes also radiate aura of pestilence, amplifying disease and poison damage from all other sources by 25% for 2 minutes. Aura of pestilence can stack up to 3 times. This relic enables mana usage. Everything about the spell was so utterly god-awful that I almost felt bad unleashing it upon the world. Temperance had different feelings on the matter. "It is truly a thing of horrid beauty," she said, tearing up a little, before insisting that I forge the relics. It was hard to fault her. Ball of dire mosquitoes was a significant improvement over her current relic, and it would pair perfectly with her smallpox ability. 3 stacks of aura of pestilence would increase her disease damage output by double, maybe more. I'd never been much of a math guy, but I knew numbers going up was a good thing. By the time we were done raiding the bodies and upgrading Temp's relic, the massive illusion that lay over the entirety of the floor had snapped back into place. In a blink, the sky was once more robin's egg blue, the grass was deep green, and the houses were no longer fleshy tumors. The illusion didn't banish Kevin or Kathy's corpses, though. They looked normal again, the tentacles were gone and there was no sign of the lawnmower torso, but they were still, very dead and very dismembered. "Don't suppose you want to clean that up?" I asked Croc, nodding toward the corpses. "I mean, I'll take what's left to taxidermy if you don't want them, but I did promise you a heap of bodies. This could be a good down payment." The dog, back to looking like a normal golden retriever, grimaced and shook its head. "You know, Dan, I never would have thought I'd turn down a free meal of delicious corpse meat, but I think I'll have to pass. And honestly, I think you should leave them here." The mimic padded over to what remained of Kevin and sniffed. Its tail dropped down between its legs. "These things are sick, Dan. It's not blight." The mimic hesitated. "But it smells almost the same. Rancid, but not in a good way. I'm not the resident expert, but I don't think you should bring these things back to the store. They could be dangerous." "Huh?" Now that really was unexpected. Croc was rarely wrong about stuff like this, though, so if it said to leave the corpses be, that's exactly what I planned on doing. We jumped back into the golf cart, and I cast an unerring arrow before we took off, determined to find a way out of this suburban hellhole. I was a little worried that the rest of the floor's residents might now be hostile toward us, but just like with the illusion, everything went right back to normal. Most of the Kevins were still out mowing their lawns or tinkering around in the garage, while most of the Kathys walked their dogs or drank wine in pairs of 2 or 3. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon and halogen streetlights kicked on in earnest, most of the Kevins stowed their mowers and moved on to other tasks. More often than not, that meant grilling. Although most of the houses had patios out back, everyone grilled on their driveways, swathed in aprons with spatulas or tongs in one hand. There was usually a single Kevin tending to the meat while others loitered about in lawn chairs, sipping generic off-brand beer while they chatted about the local college sports team, in this case, the Sunnyside Wildcats. The grill Kevin always seemed to be the alpha of the group, clacking his tongues authoritatively while the other lesser Kevins trickled by, asking about the doneness of the meat, or suggesting the cook Kevin flip the burgers. It would have been a fascinating sociological study if it wasn't so batshit crazy. Like watching some kind of docuseries on the habits of the North American male, as narrated by David Attenborough. Much as I hated to admit it. The food smelled good. Great even. The tang of barbecue sauce and the sizzle of meat left my mouth watering. I had no intention of partaking, but I caught Croc sniffing at the aroma with a longing expression plastered across its doggo face. Even Temperance seemed half tempted to pull over and grab a bite, and it was impossible to miss the outsized growl of her petite stomach. I fished out one of the concession stand hot dogs from my spatial core and offered it to her, but she just screwed up her nose and shook her head. The all-beef frank was still piping hot, since my personal subspace storage system was time-locked, but compared to the rich, heady fragrance of barbecue, the dog smelled terrible. I was hungry, but the thought of eating anything other than what the Kevins were grilling was nauseating. After another 30 or 40 minutes of driving, we finally found ourselves in a cul-de-sac on the edge of the development, bordered only by vast cornfields that stretched out for miles beyond sight. There was a huge cookout in full swing with both Kevins and Kathy swarming all over the place like worker bees, but that wasn't what caught my eye. Nope, we'd finally found the next kiosk and Jacob had been right on the money. A huge swatch of cornfield had been flattened and rudely cleared away, and in its place was a striped tent in shades of red and yellow with a sign that read Pyro Emporium unfurled along one side. More signs hung from the canvas walls proclaiming one simple word over and over and over. Fireworks. I spotted the narrow flat that served as the entrance, but there was no way to get inside. Surrounding the Pyro Emporium fireworks pop-up tent was a solid wall of residents, packed 4 bodies deep, though these weren't your typical sunny-sitters. The men were noticeably bulkier than their counterparts and wore denim jeans and Carhartt jackets instead of khakis and polos. Most were level 35, and every single one of them was named Kyle. The women, all fittingly named Karen, were also level 35 and looked like they spent their weekends doing an aggressive combination of CrossFit and hot yoga. There must have been 100 of them in total, all standing silent sentinel around the kiosk. Dweller 0.19735A, Symbiotic Hoa Thrall, Alpha Kyle level 35. The Alpha Kyle is the Hoa's enforcer class, a walking middle finger to decency, reason, and drywall everywhere. Unlike the aimless beta bitch Kevins who haunt eternal suburbia, this guy is a prized attack dog. A roided out shitkicker extraordinaire fueled by a diet of Monster Energy, gas station boner pills, and pure, uncut testosterone. If overcompensation were an art form, the Alpha Kyle would be its Mona Lisa. Physically, Alpha Kyles are terrifying. They can punch a hole through 5/8 THS-inch drywall like it's wet tissue paper, and will happily prove it, especially if you accidentally make eye contact with their girlfriend, the feral Karen. While Alpha Kyles aren't exactly tactical geniuses, what they lack in strategy, they make up for in raw aggression. They are fast, relentless, and maddeningly difficult to take down, especially when hopped up on their signature Kyle juice. Unlike the party-goers, just a few houses down, the Kyles and Karens didn't talk. Didn't move. Didn't even seem to blink. I wasn't entirely convinced they were even breathing. It was like they were fleshy mannequins or maybe robots, who'd been set to standby mode. But I was certain that they wouldn't stay that way if we tried to get inside that kiosk. Something Jacob had said earlier tickled at the back of my mind: the residents don't mind you being here. But they very much mind if you try to leave. Whatever was calling the shots around here knew we were trying to get out, and it was trying just as hard to make sure we didn't. Chapter 34. Hey, neighbors, a voice called out, not far from where we were lurking on our golf cart. A man in khaki shorts and a golf polo ambled over toward us with his hand raised in greeting. Looked like he was a straggler from the nearby cookout. "I'm Tyler Edinson," he said with a chipper smile. The name caught me off guard. Tyler Edinson? No, that had to be wrong for a dozen different reasons. For one, this guy was clearly a Kevin. Same goofy-ass shirt, same stupid shorts, same bright white tennis shoes and calf-high socks. For another, Tyler Edinson was the name of my best friend growing up, though, admittedly, I hadn't seen Tyler in years. He'd always had bigger ambitions than me and put Ohio in the rearview mirror the second he got a chance. Last I heard, he was out in California, working as a software engineer and making more money in a year than I'd likely see in 10. Probably just a coincidence. At least, I hoped so. I focused on the newcomer and her tag briefly flickered to life above his head. Tyler Edinson 0.24731B, Human Software Engineer, Level 31. This is Tyler. You know Tyler. You went to middle school and high school with this guy. Hell, he lived 3 blocks away. The first time you ever got drunk was with Tyler. Remember how he stole that pack of Natty Ice from his dad's garage, and then you got so hammered you threw up in the bushes outside Layla Dawn Catwell's house? Man, Layla was so hot. Way out of your league. What in the ever-living fuck was going on here? There was no way this was Tyler Edinson. It wasn't possible. But I'd also never told anyone other than Tyler about throwing up in those bushes outside of Layla's house. This place. It was inside my head. Reading my thoughts somehow, then projecting them onto this creature who was clearly not my former best friend. You okay, Dan? Kevin, and definitely not Tyler, asked, a curious expression creeping across his face. You look like you just saw a ghost. Yeah, fine, I lied, before clearing my throat. You just remind me of someone I used to know, is all. Ah, I have one of those faces, he said, nodding good-naturedly in understanding. This is me right over here. He hooked a thumb toward the house hosting the giant cookout. Me and my wife, Brittany, are throwing a block party for some of the neighbors. You're new here, right? To the neighborhood, I mean? Just don't think I've seen you around before. Yeah, Jacob said, stepping in to cover for me since I was still clearly shaken by the encounter. We haven't been here long, but it seems like a lovely place. I am Jacob, and these are my friends, Dan, Temperance, and our dog Croc. Jacob extended a hand in polite greeting. The man accepted and gave it a firm pump. Well, we'd love to have you come join us. It's like my wife always says, strangers are just future neighbors we haven't converted yet. Tyler barked out a sharp laugh, but his smile never quite reached his eyes. There's a new lot that just opened up down the street. I bet it would be perfect for you. Very spacious, open floor plan, huge master bedroom and enough space for a couple of kiddos. Are you thinking about kids? He asked, directing the question at me instead of Jacob. We've got a lot of young families in the area, and I couldn't imagine a better place to raise kids. Just turn 'em loose in the cornfields and let the strong sort themselves out. Circle of life, am I right? It took me a full 2 seconds before that last sentence sank in. Did they really turn their kids loose in the cornfields, or was that some sort of suburban euphemism I'd never heard before? But enough about that, Tyler Kevin said. Let's get some food in you. I bet you're famished. Ravenous even. Me? I could eat a horse. Or a school bus full of toddlers. He wrapped an arm around my shoulder, then gently pulled me toward the cookout. I didn't in any way want to go with this thing. Every cell in my body violently protested at the thought, and my survival instincts were screaming that this guy was going to lure me into his woodshed then chop me into little pieces, which he would then toss onto the grill. As much as I didn't want to go with him, though, I also didn't want to refuse his hospitality and run the risk of accidentally unleashing his wrath. If this creature turned on me, I had no doubt the others would follow suit. These things weren't violent as long as you played by the rules, I reminded myself. If I indulged him, just like I'd done with the Timmies and Tammies who'd wanted ice cream, then I'd survive. Probably. Maybe. Fine, it was a coin toss at best. But without a better plan, I let Tyler steer me over to his front lawn where other partygoers waited with large smiles and drinks in hand. Hey, If I could have everyone's attention for a moment, Tyler loudly declared as we drew nearer, I want to introduce some new friends. They are just visiting Sunnyside, but it turns out they're thinking about putting down roots. Dan here, he patted me on the good-naturedly on the back, mentioned they were interested in the new plot at the end of the street. I'd done no such thing, but I kept my mouth firmly shut as everyone politely clapped. Let's make sure to give them all a warm welcome, Tyler continued. I believe we have one of the best, most welcoming blocks in all of Sunnyside. Let's make sure they know it, too. That provoked another round of applause and light cheering, followed by a gaggle of smiling faces flocking toward us like hungry sharks smelling blood in the water. I think we should kill them all, Temperance hissed under her breath. Show a little patience, Jacob urged. Besides, they would murder us before we got within 10 feet of the kiosk. Just play nice, Kleiner Hayes. Mingle. Do a little small talk. This should give us a good opportunity to investigate more thoroughly. Temperance offered Jacob a withering stare of contempt. Need I remind you that I don't play nice with others? And the only thing I hate more than mingling is the excruciating, meaningless prattle, which other people call small talk. I would rather chop my own fingers off. Before she could say more, the neighbors converged on us en masse. A group of Cathys in sundresses surrounded Temp in a bubble and whisked her off, chatting amicable while one asked whether she wanted a glass of wine or the whole bottle. The rest of the Cathys twittered in outrageous laughter over the stale joke. Temperance stole one last glare at me and Jacob, then reluctantly let the Cathys pull her away. I shot a look of concern at Croc, then nodded toward Temp. Keep an eye on her, bud. Everything about this gives me a bad feeling. I don't want any of us to be alone. You can count on me, Dan, the dog replied somberly. If anyone tries to hurt my friends, I'll happily turn their insides into their outsides. The mimic paused. Quick question, though, Dan. Should we have some kind of code word? I think we should probably have a code word. Why would we need a code word? I asked quietly, keeping my gaze fixed on Temperance. You know, like in case things get dangerous and we have to signal to each other, but don't want to arouse suspicion? Yeah, fine, I replied. Whatever. What's your code word? Well, I've a lot of thoughts about this, actually, Croc said. It can't be a word or a phrase you might say accidentally in conversation. What about "and so the lion fell in love with the lamb"? Edward says it to Bella in the first book of the Twilight series, as a reference to their fragile and seemingly impossible relationship. It's a very evocative imagine, Dan, and I feel it thematically fits really well with this situation since we are the lambs mingling amongst the lions. Oh my God, I said, pinching the bridge of my nose. No. That's so long and unnatural. How would I even work that phrase into a sentence? Easy, you just talk about Twilight the whole time, Croc replied immediately. Trust me, Dan, suburban moms love Twilight. It's very relatable content. Let's just go with something simple, I finally said in exasperation. Like pineapple. As in, is that pineapple on your burger? Croc frowned. Pineapple? I mean, it's not very creative. Clearly you are no Stephane Meyer, internationally best-selling author and voice of a generation, but I guess it'll do in a pinch. Jesus wept, you're going to lose Temperance, I growled, flapping a hand at the disappearing murder furry. Right. Sorry, Dan. Pineapple it is. The mimic gave me a last, resolute nod, then darted off into the group of Cathys, quickly weaving between their legs to get to Temp. The women collectively oohed and awed over the dog, proclaiming what a good boy he was while patting the mimic affectionately on the head. Jacob and I didn't have long to wait until several of the Kevins came to collect us, though once again, I noticed a new wrinkle. Like Tyler, their tags had changed. There were no more Kevins. Now there was a Travis McNeilson and a Felix Schultz. A Ted Blackwell and a Harold Holt. Their job titles, each displayed with their tags, were just as diverse as their names. Construction worker, dentist, mechanic, remote IT support. The funny thing was, at least half of those names sounded oddly familiar to me. I'd known a combat engineer back in the Marine Corps named Ted Blackwell, and I was pretty sure Travis McNeilson was one of my real-life neighbors, back before, no clipping, obviously. I didn't know Travis all that well, but sometimes his mail got delivered to me by mistake and the name was unique enough that it was hard to forget. I wasn't sure why or how, but this place was definitely digging around inside my head, looking for memories it could exploit. I didn't know Harold Holt or Felix Schultz, but the second had a distinctly German ring to it and I idly wondered if they might be people from Jacob's former life. I'd have to ask him when I got the chance. The group of Kevins, all masquerading as Tylers and Travis, Harolds and Felix, ushered us through the ranks of other dwellers and over to the grill, which seemed to be the place of highest honor. The grill itself was a monster of black metal and sleek chrome, complete with 6 burners, an attached smoker, and enough grill space to charbroil 24 patties without batting an eye. As a former Marine and contractor, there wasn't much that I loved more than a good cookout, and I had to admit that grill was a thing of beauty. Tyler had plump brats in the back and rows of perfectly seasoned burgers lined up in the front. My stomach let out an audible groan, and I wanted more than anything in the world to pull the meat straight from the burners and shovel it right into my face hole. The urge was almost overwhelming, like a chemical compulsion. Instead, I fought against the desire, pushing the craving away through sheer grit and determination. "Looks good, doesn't it?" Tyler asked, his tone perfectly innocent. "The meat is a special blend, and I make the seasoning myself. It's an old family recipe, passed down to me from my grandmother. It brings out the flavor of the meat in a way that you just can't imagine. Come on, let's get you a plate." He directed me toward a nearby picnic table covered in assorted side dishes and condiments. Buttered corn on the cob, steaming hot baked beans, savory coleslaw, bright yellow potato salad, and a huge platter covered with blood-red slices of watermelon. One of the Cathys, this one named Ella, was handing out disposable plastic plates and helping the other partygoers serve up. She pressed one of the plates into my hands, then immediately ladled a heap of macaroni salad onto the surface before politely encouraging me to help myself to whatever else looked good. I shuffled down the line, picking up a little bit of everything, before finally stopping at the bun station. Before I could collect a hoagie, however, I heard a faint rustle in the bushes, followed by an urgent and insistent psst. "Hey, you don't want to eat that," someone said, the words barely more than a whisper. Startled, I glanced up and scanned the yard, searching for the source of the warning. That's when I spotted him, standing a little apart from the others, right at the edge of the lawn where the grass met the gently swaying stalks of corn. This partygoer didn't look anything like the others. He wore faded denim jeans, practical combat boots, and a beat-to-shit Vietnam-era, green canvas jacket. Guy even had some sort of army unit patch stitched onto one shoulder, a blood-red shield with an inverted rifle and a helmet balanced on top. The newcomer looked older, probably in his late 50s, with a bright orange baseball cap perched on his head, partially hiding long brown hair streaked with gray and tied back in a ponytail. His face was gaunt, his eye sockets sunken in, and the scraggly beard hugging his cheeks only served to accentuate how painfully frail he was. Specimen Biotag ID number 03V-01-B01LP8PPXW, human, variant level 34. I grunted in surprise. Unless the Kevins had substantially upped their game, this guy wasn't a dweller at all. He was a bona fide delver, real and in the flesh. Would you like to use the codex to examine this delver's spatial core? Yes, no? Thanks to a little insight from Jacob, I knew there were quite a few relics that allowed you to scan other delvers, but normally they only worked on a delver who was a lower level than you. It was also considered impolite to scan someone else without their consent. A serious social faux pas that could get you shanked in the kidney and buried in a body bag. Now wasn't the time to be polite, though, so I hit yes and waited to see what in the hell would happen. A brief flicker of discomfort flashed across the newcomer's face, but it passed after a moment, replaced by a quick and dirty readout of his basic specimen bioreport (SBR). At level 34, this guy was a full 10 levels higher than I was. The fact that I was seeing his SBR at all meant he was allowing me to see it. He wanted me to trust him, so he was extending a little trust first. Edward Mearl. Specimen Biotag ID number 03A-01-B01LP8PPXW. Variant Assimilation Level, 34. Race, Human, Variant. ___________. Health, 83. Stamina Reserve, 45. Mana Pool, 152. _____________. Spatial Core, Active. C. Pocket Sand, Level 3. C. High Tolerance, Level 15. U. Spirit Amplifier, Level 10. U. Neighborhood Watch, Level 5. U. Mutable Persona, Level 8. R. Gossip Circle, Level 6. R. Aberrant Reality, Level 5. R. Eldritch Hartonic, Level 5. R. Charbroiled Inferno, Level 7. F. Hardlight Projection, Level 8. Affiliations of Record. Sunnyside Hoa, Outcast. The SBR overview didn't tell me what any of the individual relics did, but based on the names alone I was guessing that this guy specialized in illusion-based magic. That made perfect sense, considering which floor we were on. And the fact that he had an SBR at all confirmed this guy wasn't just another Kevin, trying to screw around with my head. There was also something else about the SBR that tugged at the back of my mind, though. Something about his name. Edward Mearl. I was sure this wasn't some kind of mindfuckery, not like that bullshit with Tyler, yet I was positive I'd heard the name before. I only had to think about it for a few more seconds before something clicked into place. The radio. Wait a minute, I said, snapping my fingers at the revelation. You're that guy from the announcement. The Sunnyside maintenance worker who went missing. I squinted, studying him in a fresh light. The announcer guy said you're a contamination risk. Yeah, which is how you know you can trust me, Edward replied, sounding utterly paranoid. The first rule to surviving Sunnyside is to ignore everything the radio tells you to do. He paused, absently chewing at his lip. Except when you should listen, which is sometimes. The point is, question the signal. Question everything. That's how you live to see another day on the 24th floor. The second rule is to avoid community events like the plague, and never eat anything they give you. Not ever. He jabbed a finger at my plate, and for the first time I noticed he had a lit cigarette burning between his fingertips. I paused. Wait, no. Not a cigarette. The fuck? Was this guy casually smoking a joint? Not unless you want to have your entire system flooded with spirit spores. That's how they get you, he added, nodding to himself before taking a huge pull from the blunt. This shit's straight out of the CIA playbook, man. Psyops. Like MKUltra. First, they lull fresh meat like you and your idiot friends into a false sense of security. Then they make you question your eyes, your ears, your senses. Make you forget where the hell you are. Make you think it's safe here. Then, once they've had a day or two to sink their hooks in, they lure you rubs to one of these cookouts. He looked around at the gathering with a contemptuous sneer. With so many of these conformo sheeple in one place, the spirit social filter cranks the signal through the roof and suddenly they can get inside your head. Crack it open like a goddamned egg. He paused and narrowed his eyes, brow furrowed as he studied me. I'll bet a carton of cigarettes you've already seen someone you know. From the outside. I'm right, aren't I? I kept silent but nodded. Yeah, they've got their hooks into you all right, he said, though more for himself than for me. Not surprised either. They really pulled out the big guns for you. Don't know who you are, buddy, but these guys don't want you to leave. He glanced toward the kiosk, surrounded by Kyles and Karens. They even rolled out the elites. I'm surprised they haven't converted you already. This much spore power all in one place should be enough to reel in someone 10 levels higher than you. You must have some powerful resistances, but I'm telling you right now, you eat that food and it's game over, bucko. Just look. He took another long drag of his joint, then leaned forward and blew the smoke right into my face. The pungent smell of weed hit me like a fist, drowning out the heavenly aroma of the food wafting up from my plate. But that wasn't all it did. A notification blinked to life in front of my eyes. You've been afflicted with stoner's insight. Have you tapped into the wisdom of the cosmos, or are you just really high? Who gives a shit? You get a 10% boost to perception, grit, and evasion for 15 minutes. Enjoy the ride, cowboy. I blinked a couple times as the world seemed to swim in and out of focus. Then I looked down at the plate and recoiled. All the delicious fixings had transformed into moldering piles of gelatinous gray goop, covered with a fuzzy green substance that could only be mold. Pale maggots wriggled and crawled through the slop, forming little tunnels in their passing. I dropped the plate and took a few steps back, utterly nauseated. I'd been so close to eating that stuff. Yep, the newcomer said, nodding sagely. If you think that's bad, you should see what the meat really looks like. He leaned in close, as though disclosing some great secret. They like to barbecue the feral kids who don't make it to the cornfields before the transformation sets in. I shot a sly, conspiratorial look toward the grill. Instead of brats and burgers, I spotted what appeared to be a piece of human thigh meat and an entire hand smoldering above the flames. The fat fingers vaguely resembled bratwurst. Shit, they are starting to get agitated, the man said, nodding to the other partygoers. He was right. Although everything else still looked normal enough, it was obvious that the Kevins and Kathys had realized that something was wrong, that things were not going according to plan. We need to leave before they turn violent, the man said, pulling something from inside his oversized green military jacket. This should help. At first, I was sure it was a bomb. On second glance, I realized it was a portable ham radio, but one with all kinds of weird bullshit attached to it. Extra buttons, loops of copper wiring, a small radio transmitter, and enough lawnmower batteries to power a car. They fucking hate this song, he said with a lopsided grin and a mad light glinting in his eyes. Then he pressed a big green button and the roided-out radio blared to life. I'm not entirely sure what I was expecting, but it definitely wasn't the 1980s classic Footloose by Kenny Loggins playing at 100 fucking decibels. The reaction was instant and terrible. Although the device wasn't some kind of didgeridoo, the music rippled outward and as it did the illusion frayed like a rope coming undone. Then it shattered all at once. Pineapple. Pineapple. I screamed. Chapter 35. The thump of the music masked the billows of rage that emanated from the assembled Kevins and Kathys. Inside the span of an eye blink, all the perfect people were gone, replaced by an army of monstrous creatures covered in yellow boils and too many eyes. There were several lawnmower men, just like the freak show we'd battled before, but there were also Kevins that had different, though just as horrifying, body modifications. The Kevin working the grill was covered in oozing burns, his skin charred black and cracking. One of his arms had been entirely replaced by the smokestack of a grill, which constantly belched gouts of fire. In his other hand, he carried a rusted grilling fork the size of a medieval spear. Waiting for us in the street was some kind of reality-warped centaur, except instead of having the lower body of a horse, the upper body of a Kevin had been permanently fused with a golf cart. His skin and flesh were twisted and merged into the steering wheel column, like gnarled roots growing into the metal frame. Slithering across the driveway an army of humanoid limbs were 4 Kathys, grotesquely fused together in a chain, mouth to ass. Hundreds of normal human mouths dotted the unholy centipede's body, each one spewing an endless stream of meaningless Hobby Lobby, wall art catchphrases. Home is where you can't escape, one mouth said, while another mewled. This is where the heart stops. Dozens more pitched in. Life is short, but not here, and happiness is knowing what you fear, followed by a life, laugh, languish. The empty platitudes formed a maddening cacophony that scratched at the edge of my sanity. I prepared to summon a doorway sentinel and retreat as quickly as my feet would carry me, but faltered just before summoning my minion. These things weren't attacking us, I realized with a start. These nightmares should have been tearing me and my friends apart, limb by gruesome limb, but instead, They were simply milling around, enraged yet directionless. Each one, a ship without a rudder. One of the lawnmower Kevins lurched toward the grill, only to be confronted by the grill master with his chair-broiled flesh and flamethrower arm. Lawnmower man reached for a piece of sizzling meat, but grill master Kevin wasn't having any of that bullshit. He let out a ground-shaking war cry before unleashing a jet of flame so bright it hurt to look at. Lawnmower Kevin stumbled back a few paces, its entire body engulfed in fire, then retaliated by launching an air blade at his would-be opponent. Without a clear target, these things were turning on each other while leaving us alone completely. It was almost like we were invisible. Or pieces of lawn furniture maybe. More of the Kevins and Kathys were fighting now, battle spilling into the street like some suburban gladiatorial brawl. A pair of Kevins tumbled across the hair-covered lawn, fists flying and blood splattering against the unnatural turf. A Kevin with a pair of mailboxes for hands laid into a nearby Kathy, hitting her so hard that her chest caved in, and she went cartwheeling backward through the air. The monstrous woman slammed into the house with enough force to leave a bloody smear on the siding. A hand fell on my shoulder, and I whirled around to find Edward Merrill looking at me with hard eyes and a cold scowl. "We need to get going," he said, though it was damn near impossible to hear him over the blasting music. "I've got a way out. A tunnel that leads somewhere safe, but we don't have long. That radio only has enough juice for 10 minutes, then things are gonna get ugly." He turned and pulled me toward the cornfields. I batted his hand from my shoulder. "I'm not leaving my friends," I growled. Edward grimaced, his gaze quickly darting around the unfolding chaos. He sighed. "Fine. Suit yourself," he replied with a shrug. "I'll wait around until the battery dies." He glanced at a watch hugging his bony wrist. "But not a moment longer, you hear me? You've got 9 minutes, now. 9. If you're not ready to go, I'll leave you and your friends to die. Won't be the first time. Probably won't be the last either." Then, without another word, he turned and darted into the swaying stocks on the edge of the property, quickly disappearing from sight. I felt conflicted about letting him go. I wasn't sure whether he was on our side or not, but clearly, he knew a lot more about this floor than I did, which meant he might also know how to bypass the elite sunny-sitters guarding the kiosk. Still, I wasn't going to leave my friends behind. I surrounded myself in cable-thick strands of telekinetic power, then shot into the air so I could get a better view. Things were really spiraling out of control and the violence was spreading like a wildfire. I stole a look toward the fireworks tent, silently praying that the wall of inhuman sentinels had fallen into disorder as well. But no such luck. Despite the blaring music, which seemed to be wreaking havoc on the partygoers, the Kyles and Karens remained as still as statues, never so much as twitching a muscle. Just our luck. I tore my eyes away from the strip tent and scanned the crowd below, looking for the others. I found Jacob first. The Sandrel was on the outskirts of the party, currently trading blows with one of the lawnmower men. Surprisingly, however, he was winning. And not just winning but absolutely beating the ever-living shit out of the shambling monstrosity. The Sandrel carved away chunks of flesh with his plasma shield before activating his cowcatcher ability and plowing into the creature so hard that he sent the bastard flying and twirling gracelessly across the yard. The most baffling part was that the Kevin was just taking it. Temperance and Croc were across the lawn near the driveway and were kicking ass and taking names just as effectively. The sunny-sitters weren't even attempting to fight back. Not really. True, the sunny-sitters were still physically resilient, but that mattered a lot less when you could land 10 times as many blows without any retaliation. Temp hurled a swarming ball of wasp-sized murder mosquitoes at the nearest Kathy, then laid into the woman with her meat cleaver while the bugs went to work, tearing off chunks of flesh with razor-sharp mandibles or burrowing beneath the woman's skin. The Kathy swatted at the bugs while her HP dropped like a rock, but she didn't retaliate against Temperance. Eventually she bumped into one of the Kevins, who immediately lashed out at her with a mailbox fist made from brick and steel. Croc was busy using its tentacles to rip the limbs from another Kathy, who only put up the flimsiest pretense of resistance. She flailed at the mimic with one of her remaining arms, but there wasn't much enthusiasm behind the counter-assault. Croc lunged forward and lifted her into the air, then proceeded to literally tear her in two, right down the center as though she were a piece of lined notebook paper. Gore rained and her organs dropped into a steaming pile on the lawn. I glanced back to the cornfields where Ed had disappeared, feeling conflicted. Although I didn't want to lose my only lead, I also couldn't pass up a golden opportunity like this one. Getting through this level wasn't our only goal, after all. We also needed to grind out levels, and since these things were effectively brain-dead zombies for the next 9 minutes, there really wouldn't be a better chance. Floating high above the fray like some evil god, it almost seemed like cheating. Like shooting literal fish in a barrel. But who fucking cared? I needed to get stronger, and all I saw was free experience. I yanked a deck of Balloon Menagerie spell cards from my 2-0 belt and got to work as guitars squealed and Kenny Loggins caterwauled in the background. Since Temp, Croc, and Jacob were all fighting on the edges of the lawn and outside the range of friendly fire, my plan was to transform the lawn itself into a veritable killing field. First, I activated Fault Spike, conjuring a forest of razor-sharp earthen spears. The ground rumbled as the javelins ripped through feet and legs, punctured torso and eviscerated all the Kevins and Kathys not fast enough or smart enough to get the fuck out of the way. Without missing a beat, I activated the spell for a second and third time, until the entirety of the lawn and most of the driveway was covered in rocky protrusions and impaled bodies. Acid rain, incoming. I bellowed at the top of my lungs, before casting Stainslayer Maelstrom. Churning storm clouds appeared above the unlucky dwellers, all pinned in place like frogs on a dissection board. Sizzling droplets fell in a deluge. These things might have been resistant against physical damage, but they didn't stand a chance against my corrosive bleach storm. The acid chewed through unprotected skin and melted flailing tentacles with merciless ferocity. The Kevins and Kathys shrieked in impotent rage and attacked each other because they couldn't attack me. Meanwhile, the super bleach pooled beneath their feet and continued its grisly work, chewing into the dirt. Except, it wasn't dirt at all. The lawn really was hair, and the ground really was some sort of flesh-like material. As a result, the corrosive bleach continued to burn its way downward, leaving huge bloody divots in its wake. The earth rumbled in protest, as though it was a vast restless giant stirring from a deep sleep. My mana pool had dropped below 10%, so I fished out a couple of the mana replenishment spell cards and activated both with a word, adding 50 points of mana back to my reserve. After another 10 or 15 seconds of tool juggling, Psychic Sovereignty triggered Wild Surge, fully restoring my reserves and increasing my mana regeneration by 25% for the next few minutes. Then it was right back to the grind. Between Fault Spike and Stainslayer Maelstrom, I dealt out some brutal damage, but these things were tough as nails and bounced back fast. They weren't invincible, however, and most of them were still pinned in place, the perfect targets for a concentrated dose of hydro-fracking blast. I thrust my hand out and let loose a narrow beam of water with the cutting power of an industrial-strength laser. The geyser hit a mailbox hand's Kevin and drilled straight through his chest. Instead of relenting, I kept the hydroblast trained on my target. In the heat of battle, 15 seconds felt like an ungodly amount of time, but the wait was worth it. As the fifth stack of scorching erosion landed, the Kevin simply burst into flames as if his blood had turned into pure gasoline. He was dead in less than a heartbeat. With meticulous care, I moved the beam onto a nearby Kathy, whose hands had likewise been replaced by blenders. I dragged the line of water across her torso and cut her in two, then focused the beam on her head. Head wounds dealt extra damage, and that one died after only 8 seconds. I heard a ding and a prompt briefly appeared, informing me that I'd just earned another level. Yep, just like fish in a barrel. Feeling a surge of exhilaration, I quickly locked onto a new target and decapitated a nearby Kevin, then sandblasted what remained of his skull. Meanwhile, I simultaneously unleashed another round of Stainslayer Maelstrom, inflicting additional corrosive damage on all the Sunnysiders trapped by the forest of rocky spikes. Activating so many spells all at once would have been impossible just a few days ago, but with my new split personality sigil, it felt as easy as breathing. The ground once again rumbled in anger at my brazen bleach assault, but the Kevins and Kathys were in no position to do anything about it. Not while Footloose blasted in a loop at max volume, interfering with whatever telepathic signal controlled them. I methodically moved the beam from one enemy to the next, systematically targeting their most vulnerable areas to maximize damage. Then, to really speed up the process, I let loose with the rest of my toys. Using telekinesis, I lifted individual Sunny Sitters into the air, then slammed them into the spike-covered lawn over and over again, until they were mounds of pulp meat jello. My tools danced among the thrills, hacking, slashing, and bludgeoning with cruel efficiency. True, they didn't deal a lot of damage in the grand scheme of things, but we were playing against the clock and every little bit helped. Which is why I also sent balloon menagerie spell cards spinning down into the crowd like targeted missile strikes. Explosions thundered in the night, bright flashes of orange and yellow light punctuating the dark and leaving purple afterimages stained across my vision. The damage was adding up quickly and more notifications were rolling across my vision as the Kevins and Kathys met grisly ends. Level up. X2. Research achievement unlocked. Level up. X3. Too many notifications. I couldn't afford to be distracted, so I mentally muted them for the time being. There would be ample time to sift through all the achievements once all the partygoers were dead and we were long gone. Right now, I needed to focus on the mission. Needed to focus on the slaughter. Nothing else mattered. And I wasn't the only one who realized there was a gold mine of experience to be had. 2 Kevins and a Kathy lay dead at Jacob's scaly feet, while a mound of bodies surrounded Temperance and Croc. Limbs, ripped free by Croc's tentacles, somersaulted through the air, spraying sludgy gore in surprisingly graceful arcs. A rough count told me the 2 of them had killed almost a dozen Sunny Sitters, though I wasn't sure how to tally the centipede Kathy. Was that 1 kill or 4? I guess it didn't matter in the long run. Temp was howling with laughter, and I'd never seen her so happy. This is for forcing me to wear a sundress. She drove her cleaver into a Kevin's skull, splitting his head almost in 2. You want something to drink, do you, Kathy? She crowed in glee. Then choke on this, you frigid cow. She hurled another ball of dire mosquitoes into the woman's face. The huge and extremely disgruntled mosquitoes were not kind and stripped the flesh from the woman's head in a matter of seconds, leaving gristly red muscle and strips of white tendon behind. There were still 10 or so of the partygoers left, ripe for the killing, but something else in the distance caught my attention. At first it looked like a dark wave materializing on the horizon, washing toward us like the incoming high tide. But the longer I looked, and the closer that dark wave came, the more details I could make out. It didn't take me long to realize what I was seeing. Reinforcements. And not just a handful. Hundreds of Kevins and Kathys were charging toward us, and they were closing the distance fast. I wasn't sure how powerful that radio disruptor was, but I was pretty damn sure it wasn't going to stop what was coming our way. Chapter 36. We had maybe a minute, if that, before the legion of Hoothrils converged on us. Thanks to the houses blocking everyone else's view, I was the only one who knew about the meat avalanche about to bury us. Time to go. I bellowed at the top of my lungs. Jacob was the only one close enough to hear me. Get to the cornfield. I yelled, not bothering to explain. When he didn't immediately move, I screamed, now, for fuck's sake. Just for good measure. Apparently, the panic in my voice and the fear on my face were enough to convince him to move his ass. He dealt one final blow to the Kevin directly in front of him, cutting the man's legs out with the edge of his plasma shield, before turning and darting toward the swaying corn stalks. I yelled out again, trying to get Temp and Croc's attention, not that it did a damn bit of good. The boom of Footloose completely drowned out my words, and the 2 of them kept right on hooking and jabbing, enticed by the bloodlust and the easy experience points. I recalled my tools with a thought, then stretched out invisible tendrils of telepathic power, wrapping the weaves around my friends. I tried to lift them into air, but couldn't. In theory it should have been easy. I'd been casually tossing around freakish sunny-sitters, who were far heavier, like they were off-brand Barbie dolls. I mean, I wasn't actually sure how heavy Croc really was, but Temp was fun-sized and couldn't have weighed more than $110, even in armor and soaking wet. Despite that, it felt like both of them were old-growth trees, rooted to the ground. It didn't make any sense, so I redoubled my efforts. A terrible pressure built inside my skull, and after a few seconds of concerted effort, blood began to gush from both nostrils, running over my lips and chin in twin rivulets. "Sweet baby Jesus," I grumbled, reaching up trembling fingers and swiping at the blood. "That's probably not a good sign." Then it hit me. The sludgy, brown potions Jacob had handed us when we arrived had significantly fortified grit and drastically boosted resistance to sonic attacks. Was it possible the potion had raised their grit so much that they were unknowingly shrugging off my spell? It was the only explanation that made sense, and it meant I wouldn't be airlifting the two of them out of harm's way. To make matters worse, the horde of Sunny-Sitter reinforcements had rounded the corner and was now flooding onto our block. I reluctantly cut the flows of psychic power, since that obviously wasn't doing dick, and activated neural slipstream to buy myself a little extra time. Arctic power cascaded through my system as I became nothing more than a translucent, immaterial ghost almost invisible to the naked eye. Although I couldn't deal damage as a spectral thought, that didn't prevent me from using physics sovereignty. I angled my body and rocketed toward Temp and Croc like Superman. I phased harmless through the remaining Sunny-Sitters as time slowed and began to creep along at a glacial pace, then landed directly beside my friends who were all but frozen in combat. Now that I was on the ground, I couldn't see the encroaching army, but knew they'd be right on top of us at any second. As the countdown lapsed on neural slipstream, the world momentarily titled on its edge and time lurched back into normal speed all at once. "Dan?" Croc asked, clearly taken aback as I appeared beside him. "Where did you come from?" "Doesn't matter," I barked. "We need to go, and I'm talking yesterday." "That's going to be tough," Croc replied, a look of consternation flickering across its face. "Unless you have some sort of time travel relic I don't know about." "Do you have some sort of time travel relic, Dan? Because that would be pretty neat." "No, I don't have a time travel relic, and we seriously don't have time for this," I grumbled before slapping on Temp's shoulder to get her attention. "We need to leave." "Why would we go?" she asked, paying only half attention to me as she effortlessly lopped off a Kathy's hand with her cleaver. I've never felt more alive. This is what I was born for, and these freakish dolts are hardly even fighting back. I've gone up at least 2 full levels. Maybe 3. It's glorious. She threw her head back and cackled before launching a ball of dire mosquitoes into a lawnmower man's whirling chest cavity. "Because we're about to have a lot of pissed-off homeowners to deal with," I shot back, gesturing toward far end of the block, just in time for the front ranks of reinforcements to appear. They were running at us, driven by madness and fury, and I knew if we didn't leave now, we weren't going to get a chance to leave at all. "But what about all the relics?" Temp said, stealing a forlorn look between the pile of corpses and the wave of approaching Sunny-Sitters. "They aren't worth your life," I shouted. The words came out especially loud, because that was exactly when the weird radio gave up the ghost and died. The abrupt absence of Kenny Loggins was deafening in its own way. Suddenly, I could hear the moans and cries of the wounded thralls. I could also hear the thunderous clamor of hundreds of feet slapping against asphalt all at once. It was the sound of death, sure and terrible. Several nearby radios buzzed to life, followed in short order by the ever-chipper voice of WBSC host, Seth Nichols. "Well, you've really done it this time," the announcer said, his voice oozing with venom. "We were trying to be welcoming. Trying to be good neighbors. Trying to save you from yourselves. The backrooms are a treacherous place, and this was your one chance at happiness. But not anymore. Now you've gone and ruined it. Ruined everything, you ungrateful chowderheads." The voice didn't sound friendly anymore. Didn't even sound human anymore. Almost as though the pretense at playing pretend had been dropped entirely. The monarch was right about you. He said you would come. Said you would be trouble. Said we would have to kill you, but we didn't listen. There was a long, pregnant pause. Well, we're listening now. Sonny Sibbers, this is Seth Nichols, and the Hoa board wants you to kill the interlopers on sight. Murder them. Chop them into pieces. Eat their bones and water your lawns with their blood. String their bloated corpses from the trees with loops of their own intestine. Make them suffer. Make them pay. Those who do not conform must be punished. Perhaps there is some wisdom in your words, Temperance finally agreed with a nod. Where exactly are we going? This way, and let's just hope we're not too late. I grabbed her shoulder and pulled her along as I bolted toward the cornfield, with Croc right on our heels. We cut around the edge of the yard, leaping over corpses and dodging the grasping hands of downed Sonny Sitters, who were badly injured but not quite dead. Without a dose of Kenny Loggins to drown out the signal, they were finally starting to come to their senses. That was bad news for us, because they were pissed with a capital P. I breathed a sigh of relief when we found Jacob waiting for us by the edge of the cornfields. Then I muttered a quiet prayer of thanks to the good Lord above, because he wasn't alone. Our new and mysterious friend, Edward Merle, was standing beside the Sendril with a none too pleased scowl plastered across his face. It probably didn't help that Jacob had one hand wrapped around his arm and was clearly prepared to restrain the man, though, to be honest, I'm not sure how well that would have gone. Although Jacob was accustomed to being the most powerful person in the room, Ed had 9 levels on him. If push came to shove, I was pretty sure Ed could skin Jacob alive and turn him into a Sendril scale handbag. This man says he is with you, Jacob said. Is that true? I'm not sure I'd say he is with me, I replied, but I don't think he's actively trying to murder us. Told you, Ed growled, shrugging Jacob's hand away. As for you, he turned on me with a glower. I said you had 9 minutes. 9. Either you're a moron who doesn't understand how clocks work, which makes you too goddamn stupid to live, or you fundamentally don't grasp how dangerous this place is. He leaned in, voice dropping low. Either way, if I wasn't a moron, I would have left you all to die. He glanced over my shoulder and his eyes widened. Which, he added, is still a real possibility, unless you all get real good at listening. Can't you just deploy another one of those radio things? I asked. It's not like those grow on trees, he snapped, clearly frustrated. That took me 2 months to build. But I do have a place not far from here that should be safe. He stole another look at the horde of Kevins and Kathys quickly closing in on our position like a plague of biblical locust. Assuming they don't follow us into the cornfields. Which they probably won't. They don't like the cornfields. Why? What's in the cornfields? Croc asked, nervously surveying the silent stalks. The cannibal kids, Ed muttered, narrowing his eyes. All the harmless little Timmies and Tammies that roam around here during the day? Well, when it gets dark, they change, and they aren't so harmless. They turn into rabid goddamned animals. Let's just hope we don't run into the little shits. If we do, it won't end well. Now stay close, and for Christ's sake, keep quiet. Without waiting for a response, he wheeled around and darted into the cornfields, his movements quick and purposeful. Do we follow? Jacob asked, eyeing the retreating back of the man with obvious suspicion. At this point, I'm not sure we have any other choice, I replied. Just stay together in there, okay? A cornfield at night is worse than a maze. If we get separated, there's a good chance we won't be able to find each other. I had a terrible feeling about this, but we weren't spoiled for options, and staying put wasn't one of them. Taking a deep breath, I jogged after Ed, the others close behind me. It was hard to track Ed's retreating figure. His damn coat blended a little too well with the swaying cornstalks, but I had an ace up my sleeve. Focusing my thoughts on him, I cast an unerring arrow as I ran. Blue light coiled outward from my chest, snaking its way through the stalks like a glowing serpent. I could hear the howls of rage from the amassed Kevins and Kathys growing closer and closer, but so far it seemed Ed was right. The cornfields were the one place they didn't want to come. Perhaps it was the one place where the Hoa didn't reign supreme. With the blue light to guide my steps, I picked up the pace until I was all out sprinting. It took less than 30 seconds before I'd caught up with Ed, who was moving at a quick clip, but not an all-out run. I quickly saw the reason. He held a pair of metal L-shaped rods, one in each hand. Unless I was utterly mistaken, those were dowsing rods, old-timey occult relics that Dust Bowl farmers from the 1920s would use to find underground water. I learned about him on a TV show called Superstition Unplugged, Unplug the Myth. Plug in the Truth. It was one of those cable access shows from the late 90s where a pair of skeptical investigators traveled around the country exposing mystic bullshit, fake psychics, and haunted houses. Basically, Scooby-Doo, but for adults. The rods in Ed's hands, however, appeared to be the real deal. They swung back and forth in crazy arcs, crossing at times, then straightening at others until they ran parallel. Ed turned and maneuvered at a steady pace, weaving through various rows seemingly at random, following whatever innate magic controlled the rods. I kept an eye on Ed, but made sure that we didn't lose anyone in the labyrinth of stocks. Croc and the others were able to keep up easily enough, but the larger concern was that we weren't alone. Ed had said that the Kevins and Kathys tended to avoid the cornfields, but tended to avoid didn't sound like a hard and fast rule to my ears. Plus, the alternative wasn't any better. It was hard to imagine that the feral cannibal kids who called the fields home could possibly be worse than the army of sunny-sitter adults, but I wasn't holding my breath. After all, there was probably a damn compelling reason why the adults didn't venture out into the fields after dark. Almost there, Ed called, before glancing back down at the rods twitching manically in his hands. Just a little further now, he said, though it sounded like he was attempting to reassure himself more than us. Ed took a hard right, then a sharp left, and we rushed into a circular clearing with what appeared to be the dilapidated remains of an old barn at its center. Unlike the picture-perfect homes that decorated the rest of Sunnyside, this thing was ancient. Most of the roof had collapsed in on itself like a dying star, and the remaining boards were gray and warped from age and the elements. Instead of lumbering on ahead, Ed froze in his tracks like a deer caught in a pair of headlights. His gaze snapped toward the black, gaping maw of the barn entryway. There was something waiting inside, partially concealed by the shadows. I wasn't sure what exactly I was looking at, but it was big. So tall it had to stoop as it slunk through the opening. Chapter 37. The creature pulled itself from the barn and into the clearing, the full moon above bathing it in silver light and giving us a clearer look for the first time. It was a towering abomination of hunger and malice, easily 8 feet tall. Maybe even taller, since it moved on all fours like some kind of enormous gorilla with gangly, oversized arms. This thing wasn't a gorilla, though. It was a grotesque parody of humanity with a skeletal frame, draped in paper-thin skin stretched tighter than a drum. Enormous elk antlers twisted upward from the bleached skull of some great wolf, and its huge mouth was a cavern of jagged teeth. Burning red eyes like hot coals regarded us from deep within the skull, and I could tell it wanted to murder us all in the bloodiest fashion possible. In the center of its emaciated torso, right where its stomach should have been, was a circular mouth the size of a manhole cover, ringed with rows upon rows of teeth like some prehistoric shark. The monstrous creature shuffled toward us on all four, its limbs cracking and popping as it moved, its snout raised to the sky, tasting the air with a writhing tentacle tongue. Dweller 0.24735b, Cannibal Kid, Feral, Blighted, Level 35. Growing kids need lots and lots of food, and these not-so-little crotch goblins are never, ever full. It's like they have some sort of bottomless black hole for a stomach. Thankfully, they aren't picky eaters and will devour anything they can get their grubby, oversized, talon-studded fingers on. Including you. Like all children, the cannibal kids don't follow rules particularly well and just aren't ready to exist in polite society, where the laws of the hoa hold sway. Especially, not when the sun goes down and bedtime approaches. The rising moon does strange things to all the little Timmies and Tammies, granting them an additional 10 levels and transforming them into gluttonous, voracious creatures with an appetite for flesh. Hunting is their favorite activity, and the adults of Sunnyside happen to be their preferred prey. they'll happily make a meal of any Kevin or Kathy foolish enough to venture too far from their homes. Eventually, though, once they consumed enough parents, stripping the fetid, spore-filled meat from their bones, they grow right up, evolving into compliant members of the Hoa. Isn't the circle of life beautiful? No one move, Ed whispered, though he kept his eyes fixed on the ridiculously powerful dweller. At level 35, this thing could probably kill us all without even batting an eye. Well, maybe not, depending on what kind of firepower Ed was packing, but I didn't much like our odds. Ahead, Ed crouched down and pulled something from his coat pocket. I thought the eyebrows might climb right off my face when I saw a pint of ice cream with the words Twilight Treats emblazoned on the side of the container. Ed popped the lid, and a fetid stench washed out from the container, making me gag. Whatever was in there, it sure as shit wasn't ice cream, but the horrible creature fixed its terrible gaze on the pint of foul goop with ravenous intensity. Ed set the container down like an offering to one of the old gods, then slowly backed away with his hands raised in surrender, never making eye contact with the dweller. We all stood perfectly still, watching the creature the way a hiker might watch a wild Kodiak bear, just silently hoping and praying that it doesn't start eating you from the feet up. The cannibal kid sniffed at the air, its tentacle tongue whipping back and forth for a few tense beats. Then it moved. Moved so fast I could barely track it. In one blink it was 10 feet from the ice cream container. The next, it had snatched the container from the ground, before disappearing back into the cornfields with its prize in hand. Vanishing like a ghost, swallowed by the dark of the night. "Boy, those guys really like ice cream," Krog whispered, cutting the tense silence, "almost as much as I like froyo." "I've seen these freaks slaughter each other over a single ice cream cone," Ed said somberly. "But it's always a coin toss. Sometimes they prefer the kill over the cone. Either way, that'll buy us 5 minutes, if we're lucky. And let's be honest, luck hasn't exactly been our friend tonight." He shot me a sour glare, then trudged toward the open barn door, his boot crunching against the dirt and straw. "Well? You coming, or should I just grab a match and torch the cornfields? We could make it a party, fight every cannibal kid in 10 miles while we're at it." The interior of the barn was just as decrepit as its exterior. The roof was mostly gone and the floor was covered in moldering hay, while huge piles of corn were stacked against the walls like cordwood. Ed ignored all of that and beelined toward a corner of the room, veiled in a thick layer of shadow. Except, there was something subtly off about that shadow, I realized after a second. Mostly, it shouldn't have been there at all. The man waved a hand lazily through the air and the gloom evaporated, revealing the heavy wooden door to a root cellar, embedded in the floor. Someone had carved a series of crude sigils directly into planks. Based on my limited experience, I was guessing those runes served as some sort of barrier spell. Or maybe reinforcement wards. It was hard to say without examining them more closely, and we didn't have time for that. Not with cannibal kids and a horde of enraged sunny-sitters dogging our trail. Ed pulled an amulet from around his neck, then pressed the odd talisman dangling from the end against the root cellar door. There was a brief but intense flash of blue light followed by an audible pop, the sound of a heavy lock disengaging. He immediately returned the amulet to his neck, then pulled open the doors with a grunt and gestured for us to go down. "I'll be right behind you," he said, casting furtive looks toward the barn doors and the darkened cornfields beyond. "I've got to re-engage the locks, or those children of the corn cock-womblers will slaughter us all before we can even get our weapons out." Despite Ed's urging, I hesitated at the top of the stairs. It was possible Ed was just a good Samaritan and really was just trying to help us, but I still had doubts. Since the clipping, I could count the number of genuinely good people I'd met on one hand, and it was equally possible this was some sort of elaborate setup. "Look," Ed said, his voice weighed down with a lifetime of cynicism, "I get it, you're skeptical. That's good. Smart. You should always question the signal. Always. Hell, I'd be side-eyeing me too, if the roles were reversed. But I'm not some brainwashed conformo sheep, okay? I want you to really think about this, Kemo-sab. Does it make sense that I'd bust my ass to help, If my goal was to kill you? Do you think I'm out here, running through the cornfields in the middle of the night just for shits and giggles? If I wanted you dead, or worse, converted, I could have just left you to rot at that barbecue. He jabbed a finger at me, his eyes narrowing. So maybe cut me some goddamn slack and start using that brain of yours, yeah. It was a compelling sales pitch, and he had a couple of solid points. Besides, we did have options, even if Ed didn't know that. Thanks to the compass of the catacomber, we could bail if things really went sideways, though I was hoping it wouldn't come to that. Although theoretically I could plant a doorway back to the shop whenever I needed to, doing so essentially meant giving up all hope on advancing further. If we wanted to make it down to the franchisor, we needed to find a way to get to that firework kiosk, and that meant figuring out a way to deal with the elite sunny sitters. If anyone knew how to do that, I had a feeling it would be Ed. Okay, I said, but I'm only going to warn you once. If you try to dick us over, I swear to God that I will spend all of my not inconsiderable resources turning you into a carpet stain. You might be higher level than any one of us, but you aren't stronger than all of us collectively. When we are done, there won't be enough left of you to fill a mop bucket. Ed just grinned. You've got some fight, kid. Good. Hold on to that. You're gonna need every scrap of it if you wanna crawl out of this burning dumpster fire of a level alive. He offered us a short, humorless chuckle. Trust me, the worst is still circling, waiting to pounce. A loud, long howl pierced the night. It sounded like someone had tossed an angry wolf into a wood chipper and it was close by. Uncomfortably so. Stay sharp, I said to the others as I took the lead and slipped down the stairs one at a time, using Spelunker's sixth sense to keep an eye out for any potential traps or pitfalls. When I got to the bottom of the relatively short and narrow staircase, I found a light switch on the wall and flicked it up with my thumb. Overhead fluorescents blazed to life, revealing what could best be described as a 1950s-style bomb shelter. The walls were constructed from gray cinder-block bricks, the ceiling was a slab of thick steel, while the floor was bare concrete partially covered by a pitifully threadbare rug. There was a small kitchenette in one corner and a tiny, attached bathroom that made an Iraqi porta-shitter look roomy. As for the furnishings, they were both sparse and depressing. A tiny military-style cot. A single table with a couple of rickety chairs. Pushed up against one wall was a badly scratched coffee table that held a record player and a stack of old vinyl. By the foot of his bed was a makeshift bookcase, haphazardly cobbled together from scraps of wood and loaded down with an odd assortment of heavily creased and dog-eared books. At the far end of the room was a heavy steel glass door with the words, "Laboratory, Restricted Access" splashed across the front, and a metal bird cage dangling from the steel rafters. Strangers, strangers. An avian voice squawked in agitation. Sitting inside the cage was the largest and grumpiest-looking parrot I'd ever seen in my life. The bird was damn near the size of a house cat and was completely gray other than a few blood-red tail feathers. Stay away or I'll kill you with fire. The bird shrieked, flapping its wings menacingly. How exactly the bird was going to kill me with fire wasn't entirely clear, but I didn't want to take the risk. I mean, I doubted this parrot actually had a concealed flamethrower, but I'd seen enough weird shit in the back rooms to take nothing for granted. And it seemed my caution was warranted, since a prompt appeared above the bird a moment later. Delver number 01T-03-B0C9V8H47S, African Grey Parrot Level 13 with the intelligence of a 4-year-old and the self-control to match. African Grey Parrots are 90% attitude, 10% feathers, and 100% assholes. These little guys are more emotionally needy than your crazy ex, Chandra, and are liable to shit all over your house if you fail to pay them enough attention. And for your information, they need a lot of attention. Once you get past the violent pettiness and the unfortunate predisposition to alcoholism, you'll find African Greys are surprisingly affectionate and make great pets, or familiars. Armed with a rudimentary spatial core, they can equip up to 2 relics and are masters of mimicry, imitating anything from sirens to human voices with disturbing accuracy. Holy shit. This bird was a delver. Not a human one, obviously, but at some point, this bird had clipped into the backrooms just like the rest of us unlucky assholes. Plus, it could equip relics, which meant there was every possibility that this thing could, in fact, kill me with fire. As a level 13, this parrot was stronger than most of the howlers. There was a flutter of movement and suddenly a rubbery blue parrot, not much larger than the African grey, landed on the edge of the cage. The blue parrot still had stupid, oversized googly eyes. "You don't have to worry about us, little guy," Croc said in its most soothing voice. "We're friends with your dad, Mr. Ed. He let us in." The bird cocked its head to one side, eyeballing Croc curiously, then took a few tentative hops toward the dog who was now a parrot. "Friends?" the bird squawked. "Kill you with fire," it repeated, though now the words sounded more like a question instead of a statement. Terrible certainty. "Yeah, no," Croc replied, bobbing its head. "No need to kill us with fire. You don't kill your friends with fire." There was a clang from overhead as the root cellar door snapped closed, followed by the heavy thump of footfalls. Ed appeared at the bottom of the stairs and froze, openly gawking at the strange sight of a blue rubber bird, chatting it up with a gray parrot in a fallout bunker buried beneath the cornfield outside of a Cronenberg horror movie. "I think I might be too goddamned high," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He shook his head as if trying to clear it, then trudged over to the tiny dining room table at the center of the room. With a heavy sigh, he dropped into one of the wobbly chairs, the wood creaking under his weight. "That's Woodstock," he said, jerking his head toward the parrot. "Don't mind her, she's a good bird. A little standoffish, but she has been with me damn near since the beginning." "She threatened to kill us with fire," I said. "Don't take it personally," Ed replied. "She threatens to kill everyone with fire. Even me. Isn't that right, sweetie?" "Kill you with fire," she cooed affectionately in response. That's not the only thing she knows how to say, but it's definitely her favorite thing to say. Incidentally, setting things on fire is also one of her favorite pastimes. But she knows not to set things on fire inside the bunker, isn't that right, Woodstock? "Kill you with fire," she agreed while nodding her head happily. "I know, sweetie." Ed beamed at the parrot like a proud parent. "You're such a good girl." "Woodstock a good girl?" the parrot confirmed. "A very pretty girl. Kill you with fire." While the bird whistled contentedly, Ed pushed off his clunky combat boots with a deep sigh of relief, then propped one foot up onto his knee and began kneading the sole with his fingers. "Terrible arthritis," he said to us by way of explanation. "Getting old sucks. And it's worsened here. The damned virus system keeps patching you up, but things still break down over time. It's like that old curse, saddled with immortality, but not eternal youth. Anyway, please come in. Take a load off." He gestured at the 3 remaining chairs. "We've got a whole lot to talk about. Including how we might be able to help each other get off this goddamned floor." Tope continued,